Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our community practice session for the month of February. I hope everyone's off to a great week. We have Wendy Hardwick with us today. She is going to be talking about functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. Before I let Wendy introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. So first thing I wanted to address with everyone is this presentation will be accessible through our SPDIG link tree and through our YouTube channel. So all of that information can be found on our link tree through the YouTube channel. We will not be posting the PowerPoints themselves. Apparently there's an issue with that, so you'll just have to go back and view it through the link tree. The other thing is you are welcome and encouraged to ask questions. We just want to make sure that our questions our tone is really professional. And then of course, if you have any questions or need anything during the session, please feel free to let me know. Wendy, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. I'm Wendy Hardwick, like Rachel said. I am an MTS specialist and a Spark coach at the Department of Education in the Office of Special Education. So I'm happy to be here with you today. I've probably seen and met most of you, so it's good to see you all online today. I've been asked to talk about FBAs and BIPs. So FBAs, the functional behavior assessments, and the behavior intervention plans. So I'm going to try to walk you through the essential components of both of them. They're both powerful tools that help us to better understand and support students with behavioral challenges. So this session is designed for special education teachers, but the content would benefit anyone involved with behavior planning. So let's begin with the why. Decades of research show that proactive and positive behavior strategies like FBAs and BEPS reduce disciplinary removals and help build a healthier, more inclusive school culture. These aren't just compliance tools, they're about improving student outcomes. IDEA makes it clear when a student's behavior affects learning, the IEP team must consider supports and strategies, even if the behavior isn't directly caused by the disability. Schools are required to address it. FBAs are a powerful way to better understand the student and ensure that we're meeting our FAPE obligations. An FBA helps us uncover the why behind behavior. It's not just about identifying what a student is doing, but understanding the purpose or the function of that behavior. So we can think of it as detective work. We look at patterns and evidence to build a hypothesis that we can act on. So this is the formal definition. It reminds us that FBAs are not one size fits all. Each plan is built to identify what's reinforcing the behavior. That knowledge helps us design interventions that teach new skills and reduce problematic behaviors in meaningful and lasting ways. I do want to note that neither the Elementary and Secondary Act nor the Individuals with Disabilities Act provides a definition of an FBA. So what are the key components of an FBA? FBA are grounded in data. And let me tell you, as an MTS specialist, I love data. That includes direct observation, collecting information on the setting, the time of day, and the frequency, and gathering input from everyone involved. teachers, staff, and even the student if appropriate. All this helps paint the full picture. We use the data to look for patterns. What usually happens before the behavior? What's the payoff afterwards? Based on this, we form a hypothesis, which is the why the student is engaging in the behavior. That way, we can look at appropriate intervention planning. There is no standardized FBA form. So as special education teachers, when you are in the meeting and the FBA is produced, it can look several different ways. So I'll show you some examples. Most of them will have the same type of information. It just may look differently. So the way an FBA is organized, it has the behavior of concern, the antecedents, which are also the triggers. That's what's happening before the behavior, the events, the settings. So note how the behavior is described in observable terms and how we track things like antecedents and consequences. This structure helps the team make objective decisions. It's really important that when we are looking at conducting an FBA, we don't have a whole list of behaviors that we're trying to observe. We need to prioritize the behaviors as what are the most disruptive to the student's learning. Those are the behaviors that we're first going to look at during an FBA. And we need to be very specific on what behaviors we're looking at. When we say hitting to one teacher and hitting to another teacher may be different. We need to look at, is it open fist, closed fist? Was it with intent to do bodily harm to a peer or a student? The more specific we can be, the more accurately we can come up with interventions. So this graphic simplifies the FBA process. What happened before the antecedent, what the behavior was, and what happened immediately after the consequence. So in this case, the student throws a worksheet and avoids the assignment. The escape behavior is what we call the function. So math worksheet with 20 problems placed on the student's desk. The student crumples up the worksheet and throws it on the floor. The consequence is the teacher removes the worksheet and allows the student to read a book. So that we can hypothesize that the function of the behavior is to escape or avoid math assignments. So teachers aren't expected to be the ones to conduct the FBAs, but they play a vital role in the process. They're often the first to notice a pattern. We provide valuable data, and we collaborate with trained professionals to make decisions about support. FBAs are sometimes required under IDEA, particularly if a student is facing removal from their current placement. If the behavior is a manifestation of their disability, the team must conduct an FBA to determine next steps. That's the exact quote from IDEA. So as a teacher, when should we recommend an FBA? We should recommend an FBA when behaviors persist despite our classroom interventions, when safety becomes a concern, or when the behavior disrupts learning. If you tried typical management strategies and things aren't improving, it's time to escalate support. So what we're talking about is having those universal behavior supports in your classroom, the tier 1 supports. You have incorporated those into your classroom management, but you have a few students that need broader support, more intensive support. So you might offer some tier 2 interventions to those students, but they're just not working. That's when we would look at an FBA. Or if the student's behavior is extreme, such as physical aggression towards an adult or a fellow student, elopement from the school, or property damage. When a student's behavior is a safety issue, we should probably immediately look at an FBA. This slide adds more criteria, such as failed interventions or team consensus, that a formal process is needed. A student doesn't need to be in crisis to qualify for an FBA. Early referrals can help prevent the escalation. So we're looking for those patterns of disruptive behavior and lack of progress with other interventions. So we've recommended an FBA. An FBA has been conducted. We have provided the data and information to whoever's conducting the FBA. At that point, we're going to transition into a behavior intervention plan, a BIP. You'll hear it referred to as BIP, BIP, or the behavior plan. I will also add that this process can be used for students in the general population that are not receiving special services. The consent is a little bit different, and it is not usually referred to as a behavior intervention plan, but a behavior support plan. A BIP is built from the FBA. It uses that information to outline how we'll respond to the behavior, what supports we'll provide, and how we'll reinforce the positive alternatives. It's individualized and it's intentional. So a good BIP starts with clear behavior description. It identifies the function from the hypothesis developed in the FBA, and it includes proactive prevention strategies. These strategies aren't just about managing behavior, they're about changing environments and building skills. As a side note, we know that a lot of behavior comes from skill deficits. So we're building those skills into the behavior, and that's addressed in the behavior intervention plan. So this slide dives deeper into what a BIP includes. We look at replacement behaviors, reinforcement, and how we respond to challenging behaviors. We emphasize that we're not just removing behaviors. We want to talk about that replacement behavior. And this is not just for a behavior intervention plan, but really when we're dealing with any type of behavior in the classroom, we always want to offer a replacement behavior. That is what behavior is acceptable that we can teach that student. So, for instance, if a student's behavior that's disruptive is that they're constantly getting up and walking or running around the classroom, that's not acceptable and it's disruptive to learning. However, when we are looking at doing an intervention, we need to think about what do we want the student to do instead. So sometimes that is remaining in their seats, but depending on what the function of that behavior is, the student might need that outlet of standing up and moving around. So can we teach the student to go to a specific spot in the classroom, the back of the classroom, or we can take off a square somewhere, where when that student needs that outlet, they can go there. It's not as disruptive to the learning, and it's a replacement for the behavior that is. It's not just enough to implement a plan. We have to track if it's working. This includes who collects the data, how often, and what kind. Without monitoring, we can't adjust the plan or know when a student is ready to fade supports. It goes back to the data. Data is important in order to see if things aren't working, but also if things are working. Just like the FBA, the BIP doesn't usually have, there's no standardized BIP for the state. So you'll see different incarnations of what a BIP looks like. For the most part, they're going to have those major areas as far as what the specific behavior is that we're intervening on, what the hypothesis is of the function of that behavior, setting some clear goals, and providing some action steps. I have seen in some BIPs another component, which is how to interact with the student or interaction strategies, which I think is also really beneficial, because the BIP is something that's going to be disseminated to everyone that works with that student so that everyone is on the same page. This is the behavior that we're trying to address. This is why we think the behavior is happening. This is the intervention that we're trying. And these are ways that you can interact that we have found successfully with that student. Here's another example of what a behavior intervention plan might look like. This one you can see has a flow chart. It has what they believe the setting event is, what the antecedent, and then the desired behavior, that's the replacement behavior, the consequence, the function. At the bottom, you can see that it has more areas for you to lay out specifics of the intervention plan. Here's another one. It has more of a narrative where you put in a narrative for all of those components. Communication is going to be the key. Teachers should be involved in reviewing the data, discussing what's working, and offering feedback to refine the plan. BIPs are living documents, and they should evolve over time. Teachers need to be at the table when we're talking about the BIPs because you're going to be the ones that are implementing it. So you need to include your feedback on, is this feasible? The intervention that the team might be discussing, is it something that is feasible and can happen in your classroom? Is the way that they want to collect data a way that's going to be realistic in your classroom? Teachers bring context no one else has. So we know what has worked, what hasn't worked, how the students respond to things in the classroom. We need to be active participants in the plan development to make sure that it can be implemented with fidelity. And there's that word, fidelity. Fidelity matters. If we don't implement consistently, we can't say whether the plan is effective. We need to follow the strategies that are outlined in the BIP that the team decided on. And we need to utilize the reinforcement systems that have been written into the plan. And then we need to document the outcome. We need to be having regular meetings as a team to discuss how the student is reacting to the interventions. I want to also say that by the time a student's behavior has gotten to the point where we're looking at FBAs and BIPs, this should no longer be just the teacher addressing this behavior. Teachers address behavior at tier 1 and a lot of times at tier 2 interventions. But by the time we're getting to tier 3 interventions in behavior, which would be where a FBA or BIP fall, we've moved from teacher only addressing the behavior to a team needing to address the behavior. So that's the team that's looking at the FBA that was conducted to develop the BIP. It's a team that should be looking at the data to discuss whether or not the behavior plan is working and what adjustments need to be made. Plans aren't static, they're living documents. So we need to be meeting with the team regularly, sharing the data, voicing what's working, what's not working. Your feedback shapes how the BIP is revised and how it can improve over time. As teachers, we also need to be supporting the student. So positive reinforcement and consistent adult responses are two of the most powerful tools that we have. We need to be making sure that the student is being cared for and valued. We also need to remind our staff that the student is watching how we respond, not just individually, but as a team. So we need to be united. Progress monitoring for BIPs. Progress monitoring is more than data. It's about decision making. Are we seeing fewer problem behaviors? Are replacement behaviors increasing? This slide reminds us how to use the same data we use to start the intervention when we evaluate whether to continue or fade support. So when we are collecting behavioral data, and this is at any tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, I'm going to use the example of a universal screener that can be used for behavior, and that's an office discipline referral or an ODR. A lot of times when we're talking about behavior and whether or not a student needs to be brought up in behavior support to maybe a tier 2 intervention, we look at, okay, how many ODRs is going to make a trigger? So if a student receives 3 office referrals within a week, that's going to trigger us looking at a tier 2 intervention. So then a student starts receiving that tier 2 intervention. We also need to have made the decision, okay, when can we fade that support? When are we going to say, all right, that student might not need as intensive supports anymore? And that should be the same criteria. So if we use the number of ODRs to trigger the support, we'll use the number of ODRs to fade the support. So it would say something like, if a student does not receive more than 1 office referral in 2 weeks, that would trigger a fading of support. So basically, it's just important that we are using the same criteria on both sides of the data collection. So I have an example that walks through how identifying a function leads to a target replacement behavior and a BIP. So an FBA may show that a student who repeatedly calls other students inappropriate names during recess may be doing so because the student wants to develop friendships, but is unaware of how to get the attention of peers in a positive way. By identifying the function or the purpose of the behavior, which in this example may be that the student is trying to gain peer attention, make friends, and developing a behavior plan that teaches the student social skills and provides the student with opportunities to practice those social skills, the student can then engage with classmates using appropriate strategies, gain positive peer attention, and developing friendships. So this shows how understanding the why of the behavior helps us provide students with tools that they need to be successful. All right, we have another example. So an FBA may reveal that a student who repeatedly talks during silent independent writing time is doing so to avoid a task that the student finds difficult writing. With this information, educators can develop a plan that uses strategies to address the challenges the student has with writing for extended periods of time. These strategies may include breaking a longer assignment into smaller segments, chunking, scaffolding writing assignments, teaching the student appropriate strategies for how to approach a difficult assignment, and feelings of frustration. Pairing the purpose of the student's behavior with responsive strategies allows the student to complete classroom assignments, reduce classroom disruptions, and improve student-teacher interactions. So FBA and BIPs aren't about fixing students. They're about understanding and supporting them. Teachers don't have to do this alone, but they are essential in identifying the concerns, implementing the supports, and monitoring the outcome. So this table clarifies what teachers are and aren't expected to do. It helps prevent burnout and confusion while highlighting the critical role educators play in behavior planning. So, for example, teachers are responsible for recommending an FBA if behavior is persistent or severe. We're responsible for providing data and observations related to that behavior. We're responsible for implementing the BIP strategies with fidelity. We're responsible for participating in behavior team meetings and for monitoring and tracking student progress. So what teachers aren't responsible for: conducting the FBA unless appropriately trained and qualified, writing the entire BIP independently, deciding to exit or change interventions without team input, diagnosing or labeling the function of behavior, creating formal assessment reports. FBA and BIPs aren't just reactive. They can be integrated into a proactive tiered system. This connection to MTSS helps us provide support for things before things escalate and creates a system-wide culture of behavioral supports. In those systems of supports, we have our Tier 1 universal prevention. So at Tier 1, school staff can use what they know about behavior to anticipate and prevent problems before they start. They might include clear hallway routines or consistent adult responses across settings. Tier 2 is where we apply group strategies for students with similar challenges without needing individualized plans. For example, a small group social skills intervention could be developed using basic function-based thinking. And then we have our Tier 3. This is where FBAs are most often used when behaviors are chronic, dangerous, or not responsive to the less intensive strategies. In these cases, we need comprehensive, individualized supports grounded in strong data. An effective FBA requires a team with training and experience. Teachers are key contributors, but trained professionals should lead the process. Collaboration with families and students strengthens the plan and buys buy-in. So, FBAs are team-based. This slide outlines the full scope of professionals who might be involved, from teachers and counselors to psychologists and community providers. Everyone brings a valuable perspective to the table. For those interested in learning on how to conduct FBAs, the Oklahoma Autism Center offers training, and the OSDE is working on a virtual option for teachers. I will say that virtual option is a course that's going to be on the OSDE Connect, and it is coming soon. Benjamin might have more information on when that's going to be posted. Along with the FBA and BIP course, we're putting out a suite of behavioral courses on OSDE Connect. We have system level behavioral supports, and we have classroom level behavioral supports. The courses are Tier 1 in the classroom. There's a separate course for Tier 1 at the system level. Then we have Tier 2 and Tier 3 in the classroom, and we have Tier 2 and Tier 3 at the systems level. These are some other areas where you can get some more information on behavior and reacting to behavior, conducting FBAs, and conducting BIPs. We have our policies and procedures, and we have our evaluation and eligibility procedures book. I'm going to open it up for some questions. If anybody has any specific questions on conducting FBAs or BIPs. Before I do that, I do want to say that FBAs are a formalized process in hypothesizing the function of behavior. But as teachers, we do this every day, and we don't always have to go through a formal assessment. We can hypothesize the functions of behavior at Tier 1 and at Tier 2 and do interventions in our classrooms directed for that. And an example of that is when I was teaching in the high school, I had a student that was chronically skipping classes. When I pulled the data and looked at his schedule and looked at the classes he was skipping, I saw the pattern that he was skipping math class every day, but attending his other courses. So I didn't need a official FBA to come up with the hypothesis that he didn't like math and that there was an issue with the math class. in order to start an intervention for that. Benjamin's putting when our behavior courses are. So we should always be, when we have behavior in our classrooms, we can always look at the function. I can also tell you that the most common functions of behavior are attention seeking from peers or adults, escape from a setting or a task, wanting something tangible, such as food or a preferred activity, or sensory is also a function of behavior. So most often you can find the function within those 4 areas. I saw some things happening in the chat. Were there some questions?
So the questions are not specific to FBAs.
Okay.
So right now we're getting a couple of questions about a certificate of completion or proof of attendance for this meeting. Benjamin, do you know anything about this? I know we take attendance on our end, so we're able to track it, but as far as a certificate of completion, I don't know about that. And then there's another question, so I'll let Benjamin answer that first one because I see he's coming off of mute. Okay, maybe he's not.
Oh, I think
There he is.
are they asking specifically for something that says that they attended these community practices?
I think so. That's what I'm getting. But we take attendance on our end. But
Yeah,
there's no. Go ahead.
Yeah, we don't have any like certificates or identifiers that we send out to people to give to like their districts or to their bosses or managers, indicating that they attend these community practices, mostly out of the sake of privacy too, because we probably shouldn't be giving away the information of people without their consent either.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. And then you have a question about the online courses that you have access to for Spark. So I'll put my email as well as Yasmin Brown's email in the chat, and you would want to send that question to both of us. Okay, are there any other questions on behavior for FBAs and BIPs? Okay, Wendy, I think that was really great information. A lot of great resources are going to be accessible to teachers, administrators. So feel free to get the word out. There's lots of behavior resources out there. We're working on getting them to where you guys can easily access those. And I did put the link to the SPDIG link tree.
And Rachel, if you'll put my email in the chat, if
Sure.
if any of the participants are Spark teachers, if you have any behavioral questions, feel free to email me. We can talk.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always send questions our way. We're happy to help. Okay, I think that's it for today. Joining and have a great afternoon.